Okay, we're looking at, now, since Shelley isn't here, Shelley will, as you know, Shelley and I have had conversations. She's an extrovert. As everybody knows, Shelley's an extrovert. She thinks out loud, and that's what extroverts do, and that's a wonderful thing. I need outside thinkers, that will respond. So file that away. So it's going to be an awesome responsibility.
Seat,
and Barb, you're in her seat, and you've already disappointed Coco because you didn't have any Nicos. Okay, we're looking at Genesis. And I'm not going to go through the review because y'all have already been here, and we got a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff to cover. And so we're in the Jacob story. And so we've done Abraham, we've done Isaac, we're in the Jacob, although Isaac is going to make an appearance again. In just a few sentences, what has happened? Where are we with Jacob? What's the deal with Jacob? Just give me highlights of what we've talked about.
Well, he had a brother.
Had a brother.
Didn't get along
too well, and it was all his brother's fault. Not.
He stole his brother's
birthright.
And his blessing.
Cheated his father out of the blessing. Brother hates him. Last week he had, Jacob had a little deal with
his father-in-law,
and it's a complicated thing with Laban, the father-in-law. At this point, cheated him too, because that's what Jacob does. He tends to cheat people, but Laban was cheating him as well, so they were both cheating one another. And by the time we get to this story with Jacob and Laban, what is Jacob's situation?
Wealthy.
Okay, Jacob is wealthy. He's got all kinds of stuff. Most of the stuff came from who? Laban. Because Jacob kind of rooked Laban out of stuff.
Oh, did you really feel that he did that, or he was blessed with it?
Yeah. Well, I think that I
wasn't here last week, but that's what
I think that's we've got this undercurrent that God is in control. And we've seen that over and over again. And even though Jacob is doing things like with the stripped, spruce, to get the muddled sheep, he's intentionally doing this. Yeah. We get the sense that God is still in control. And we're going to continue to see this. This is going to kind of be a theme in Genesis, that people are going to do things that aren't really nice, but we get the sense that God is in control of it and is leading it, moving it in a direction. Less God constantly intervening and causing floods and, scattering people and showing up and having dinner, and then destroying cities. We're kind of moving away from that, but God is still present and working through all these situations. So even when Jacob proves to be a real stinker, and he does, we still get this sense that God is involved. And that's probably a good thing, that God is in control, because if God is going to treat Jacob the way Jacob deserves to be treated, Jacob's in big trouble. Jacob's in big trouble, because Jacob is not he is not a nice person. Now, he's got all this stuff, right? He also has a wife, right?
2 or 4.
Yeah. He's got 2 official wives, and then has 2 wife lights, so he's got companionship, and he's got a bunch of kids, right? Okay, right now we've got how many kids?
Oh Lord, I don't know.
Well, we got 11. We don't have 12 yet, but we're going to get 12. But we have 11. But his favorite wife was Rachel, and the son of Rachel is Joseph. It's Joseph. Okay, so that's where we are, and he's left Laban, And remember, we had that little deal with leaving Laban, and now he's made a covenant with Laban, but he's going into the land, right? And that's where we pick up in chapter 32, right? He's about to enter the land. And just so that the writer, and remember, we're not talking about one hand writing it, but maybe a one hand bringing together a lot of stories. As he's about to enter this land, what does Jacob encounter right on the border? What's that? Angels of God. We got all kinds of angels of God there at the camp. So we get a reminder that God is in control and is with Jacob, right? And so now we have one unresolved problem, right? We got his relationship with Laban resolved, but we don't have his relationship with Esau, his twin brother, resolved. Because the last time we saw Esau, in one tradition, one set of stories, Esau wants to do what? Kill him. Wants to kill him. And the only reason he's not killing Jacob is because
his mother sent him away.
Well, what was even before his mother sent him away? Why wasn't Esau going to kill Jacob? You remember that? Why Esau wasn't going to kill Jacob because they were in mourning for Isaac. They were all in mourning because of Isaac. But as soon as the mourning was over, Esau was gonna settle up with Jacob. That's why Rebekah had to get Jacob out of town. Now the other tradition, Isaac and Rebekah want him to marry somebody in the family, so they send him away. But he's coming back. We got an unresolved problem with Esau. And as soon as he enters the land, once we're reminded that God is with him, who enters the story? As soon as he enters the land, Jacob makes a decision. What does he decide to do? Because he's heading into this land, right? What does he do?
Sends a messenger.
Sends a messenger to Esau. Sends an Esau a message to Esau. Now, what is the purpose of this message? Because he doesn't send the messenger empty-handed, right? He sends it with stuff. And what's the purpose?
Just keep him from killing him.
Yeah, because the last time he was there, Esau was sharpening knives. The last time Jacob was around, Jacob wants to know if his brother has cooled off, which is what Rebekah wanted. Come back when Esau's kind of cool. He also wants to gather a little bit of information, right? And so he sends a messenger, right, with the stuff, and the messenger comes back with a message that is clear as mud. What's the message that the messenger brings back?
He's not taking what he
Esau
offered.
is coming with 400 men or something.
Yeah, Esau is coming to meet you with 400 men. Now, what does that mean?
Probably wants to kill him.
A war.
Yeah.
Well, could be.
That's what it sounds like.
Could
They're
be.
400 friends.
It could be that he's coming to meet him and reconcile. We don't know. Now, if Jacob is truly a faithful person, totally trusting God, and he hears that Esau's coming with 400 men, Jacob is going to trust God, right? That God's going to work it out. If he's an optimist, his brother's going to come to reconcile. With his friends, yes, 400 buddies. He's coming with it. But Jacob, of course, doesn't take it that way, right? What does it seem as though Jacob assumes? Well, the writer tells us, that Jacob is afraid. And again, as I reminded the Luke people, and I remind you again, we are never intended to be in these stories. The writers do not want us to be part of the story. The writer wants us to look at the story. We're looking down at the story. That's why the writer tells us that Jacob's afraid. So we know Jacob's inner thoughts. If we were in the story, we wouldn't necessarily know that. But God tells us this stuff, or the writer tells us this stuff. Okay, so Jacob, now we know something about Jacob. What do we know? So Esau's coming with 400 men. Jacob is afraid. We know what about Jacob? We know several things about Jacob, right? What do we know about him?
He's wealthy.
He's wealthy. We know he's wealthy. What else do we know about him?
He has God with him.
Yeah, he's got God with him. What else do we know about him?
He has all these
He's
people and
deceiving.
animals. And
He's got all these people and animals. Oh, y'all are so nice to Jacob. What else do we know about Jacob?
pig.
He's a pig, right? But he's not a stupid pig. We know Jacob is sharp. We know he's shrewd. I mean, that's how he cheated Laban, because he was smart and shrewd. You know, so we know that about Jacob. So Jacob immediately makes a plan. And what is his plan?
Buy his brother off.
He's going to try to buy his brother off, but he does it in a very interesting way. What does he do?
He divides up his.
Okay, he divides up everything he has, right? He separates it into two companies. And what's his assumption?
That if Esau kills one group,
He won't kill the other.
He'll still
Yeah.
have another group
Okay.
left.
So he'll have half the stuff left. So he divides his property in two. What's the second thing he does? What does he start doing in verse 9?
Right, keep going.
As everybody who's been in big trouble does, he turns to God. And when you look at his prayer, it's a kind of interesting prayer. What does he do in this prayer? How would you describe this prayer that Jacob is making to
He's telling me
God?
had a promise.
Yes, the prayer isn't, I am humbly before you, Lord. And it's, God.
You promised.
Yeah, we got a deal. and my brother Esau is coming to break that deal. So it's time for you to step up and keep your end of the bargain, right? So it's a prayer that isn't exactly a humble one. We want to file that away because we're going to kind of come back to it in a little bit. So he goes to God in prayer, but that's a good thing that he's praying to God. And he reminds God of the covenant, which also reminds who of the covenant?
God.
Us, because we're reading. He reminds God of it, but he reminds the writers, reminding us. Remember, we're reading this as a story, so this prayer reminds us of the covenant. And then what does he do? And this is where he gets, Jacob is really shrewd. So he's divided his property up into two parts. He goes to God, and then what does he do?
He has the servants go ahead and take him some of his herd.
Now, that's right. Now he's going to buy him off. Now's the time to buy him off. He divided the property to protect it, goes to God, and now he's going to divide it off. And when you read the way he does it, he really is kind of shrewd. Because he doesn't just send the gifts in one bunch, does he?
Nope.
What does he do?
Separates them in three different.
He sends them in three waves. So as Esau, now you get the picture, Esau's coming towards him, he hits the first row of gifts, right? Which softens Esau maybe a little bit, but not enough. Esau continues to go forward. He hits second level gifts.
And he calls his brother the master.
And then he's going to come and get the third level gifts. So what he's handling his property in a pretty shrewd way to win the favor of his brother, right? And he sends his wife and kids to the other side of Jabbok, to the brook, and the writer of the story tells us he is alone, right? And what happens to Jacob as he's alone?
This is where he wrestles.
He has a wrestling match, right? Through the night, in the dark. Now, in this story, who is he wrestling? With whom is he wrestling?
God.
Well, Jacob will eventually say it's God. Originally, there's no real indication right at the beginning that he is wrestling with God. And Jacob is holding his own. And what does, as they're wrestling, what does this figure, and Jacob's going to say God, so we're going to say that he is wrestling with God. What happens? What does this man do?
He injured his hip.
He injures his hip, and Jacob now has a limp, and he will have a limp from now on. So he's injured. Then what happens? Because they're wrestling all night, and then what occurs?
And the sun came up. And
Okay, this man is going to go. Now this can be where this story comes from, don't know, and we don't want to speculate because that's not all that important. But where it comes, it's this wrestling with something, but we're not sweating because Jacob will say it's God. Clearly, this figure wants to leave as soon as it gets light, because that's when he wants to go. And what happens when the person says, let me go? What does Jacob then say? This is probably the most preached and interpreted parts of Genesis. This one little story of Jacob wrestling this
He won't
guy.
let him go until he's be blessed.
Okay, wants a blessing. And what does this man ask of Jacob?
That's his name.
What's your name? And the man, Jacob, gives his name, and the man says what?
You're no longer that.
You're no longer Jacob, you are now Israel, because that's what it means in Israel. Wrestle with God, struggle with God. That's what it means. Told you, anytime you see El at the end of a name, any kind of name, God's involved. Always. 100% of the time, that's the Hebrew word for God, is El. So if El, Samuel, Daniel, all of those have something to do with God. Bethel, all of those have to do with God. So he gets a new name. Now, symbolically, what becomes significant in him getting a new name?
Probably helps his brother not want to deal with him anymore.
Well, in a sense, he's getting a new life, a new identity. He's also grounding, the writer is, because remember, we're talking about a father telling his son 1,000 years later, Daddy, why are we called Israel? Well, let me tell you. Why were there 12 tribes? Well, let me tell you why. And so this kind of establishes Israel. It also kind of makes this idea of striving with God, that, well, we'll talk about it in a little bit. So what ends up happening to Jacob? The writer does tell us, clearly he's writing to people later, because he says, and by the way, that's why we don't eat the meat around, that joint, So, I mean, he's writing to an audience much later. What ends up, what does God end up doing for Jacob? So Jacob, he's now got a limp, he's disabled. He's got a new name, and what else does God do?
He meets with Esau.
What's that?
He meets with Esau.
Well, we'll hold on Esau, but God does give him the blessing, and then is gone, and clearly Jacob believes that he's wrestled with God because he names the place Peniel, and Pen means face, and El means God. So he's encountered the face of God. So he has seen the face of God. Now, file that away, because face is going to play a big role. Pen is going to play a big role in the stories that follow. Now, what does this story, and so now Jacob, but he hasn't met Esau yet, this little wrestling, what does this little wrestling match, what is this saying, what does that tell us? Because the writer has included this. Didn't have to, could have just left it out. But because it doesn't really relate to what's going to follow. It really doesn't. It didn't relate all that well to what came before it. And he's going to get the name Israel later, in the chapters we're looking at. What is this little story telling us about God?
He keeps his word.
Okay, God keeps his word, therefore the covenant
Is not broken.
is not broken. there's a wrestling thing here. And Jacob leaves it injured. I mean, he doesn't just walk away. He doesn't walk away stronger than he was before. He walks away injured. What is that? What might the writer be suggesting? Not only about God, but about God's relationship. Okay, power of God, certainly the power of God. What's interesting is there are times in that story where it appears as though Jacob has the upper hand because God wants to get away. And Jacob says, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. So it appears as though at that point, Jacob is winning. But I agree with you. I think we got power.
If it is God, he's hands-on.
He's very literally hands-on. Yeah. So God is hands-on. Remember the nature of covenants? What is the nature of covenant that makes a covenant different than a promise?
You expect nothing.
Well, okay, good. When somebody makes a promise, if I make a promise to you, at least I should, unless I'm playing a game. If I make a promise to you, I'm not making it because you're going to give me something back. I'm making a promise to you because this is something I want to give.
Contract.
Yeah, a covenant is a contract, which means, you got two sides, which means there's,
Free will?
well, free will. You also have, I'm thinking, true, right, because you choose whether you're going to honor it or not. You also have a cost in a covenant.
Yeah.
There's a price in a covenant. And although God is doing what y'all are suggesting he's doing, and we're going to see that he continues to do it, although usually behind the scenes, there's going to be a price. There's going to be, and this may be symbolic of the price. And if you say that this is not just the story of Jacob, but the story of Israel, we may be talking about the same thing, that you're not going to go through your history, even though God is on your side, move through your history assuming that you will never have to pay a price. There's never going to be injury, that everything's going to be great, because that's not the way it is. That's not the way covenants work. Covenants always have price. But we have this going on, this wrestling match. Interesting story. Good night, read. If you read for this stuff for maybe 15 minutes, you're going to see 5 different interpretations. So there's a lot of different interpretations because the story's kind of vague. Now, when the story is over, though, it says Jacob, and it doesn't say Israel looks up. It says Jacob looks up. So the writer of this part of the story is really not involved in what came before it. So this wrestling story was kind of put in there, is coming from another tradition or another source, because Jacob comes back in the next chapter, and when Jacob looks up, who does he see?
Esau.
Yikes! And the writer reminds us he sees Esau and
400 men.
400 men. So what does Jacob do?
Sends his kids and stuff. His family.
Oh, Jacob is really good. He gets his family together because, he has divided his company and they will cross the river. And what does he do with his family?
Puts his servants and their children and his wives and their children.
And that is his favorite one.
He's a pig! Jacob is a pig! Here comes Esau that Jacob assumes is what?
They're
Going to kill him. And so Jacob is here, Esau is here, and Jacob says, I've already sent all these gifts in waves, and he's still coming. I'm going to send my family in waves. And so, but the ones that I don't like quite so much, I'm going to put out front. Even though you're talking about women and his kids. So he's with the women and his kids, front line. And if Esau and the 400 men hack their way through that group, the next line is the wife that I'm, and her kids. And then behind is Rachel and Joseph and me. So they're going to have to, Esau's going to have to hack his way through my family to get to me. Jacob, he is not a good guy. He's a pig. Now, why are we constantly reminded of his piggishness? His
He
pigness.
is the way he lives.
Well, yeah. Why do you think the writer? Because to me,
God forgives.
well, God forgives, but we're never going to see Jacob asking for forgiveness. He's not asking for forgiveness. He doesn't say, I'm a
He
pig.
just keeps on going with his.
Because,
Piggishness.
yeah, that's right. If anything, it gets worse.
Yeah.
You know, why would the writer do this? Because he could, man, he's got control. He could take these stories out and just leave the good stuff in. And I'll tell you, if we want to look at the heroes of the past, that's what we do. You know, we don't like our heroes flawed. You know, we like them pure. You know, so we take the bad stuff out and focus on the good stuff. Why would the writer, and he's writing this is a religion, for crying out loud. This isn't just respecting a leader. This is he's writing about God's relationship with humanity. Why is Jacob so flawed? And the writer feels comfortable showing us all his flaws.
Human races.
Human race is, and this isn't about the human race. This is about Jacob. This is about
Us.
God. This is about God. This is about God. This is about God and his promises. And even though Jacob is highly flawed, but so was Abraham and so was Isaac, Jacob just took it to another level. God is going to continue to be faithful. There's going to be a price. There are prices. But God is going to continue to be faithful.
But it says here in verse 3 that Jacob went on ahead, so he divided the women and children, but it said he went first
And bowed.
and bowed
Showed-
for Esau.
Which is kind of interesting because this bowing business is not typical of Jacob. This is not a typical thing with Jacob. And what does Esau end up doing? That's an excellent point, Janet, because this shows that with this change of identity, that there's also maybe a slight change in character. What does Esau do? And Jacob is so afraid of Esau. What does Esau do?
He ran to him.
He runs to him and embraces him. And as they have their conversation, what does Jacob find out about Esau? What does Esau say to him?
He already has a point.
He's got all kinds of stuff. I don't need your gifts. I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you kind of to reconcile. And it's very interesting that what does Jacob say to his brother? When he's looking into his brother's eyes, what does he say?
To see your face is like seeing
The face of God, which is Peniel. In Hebrew, it's the face of God. So, evidently the writer wants us, because he emphasized Peniel in that wrestling story, because that's what Jacob calls the place, Peniel. He wants to emphasize that there's a tie between these two stories. Gotta be, because he uses the same terminology in it. And in fact, what does Esau want Jacob to do? What does he want him to do?
He wants him to come with him.
Let's go together. Let's be partners. Now, Esau is living in Seir, which is in a country that he calls Edom. And I mentioned it last week. Esau is going to be the father of the Edomites. And the Edomites and the people of Judah are always going to be in conflict. Sometimes the people of Judah are going to be in charge, or Israel, when there's a united nation, they're going to have power. Other times the Edomites are going to have power. It's going to be a constant rivalry between the two. Okay, and so Esau is there, wants him to go with him. Jacob says,
Why?
yeah, Esau says, look, let's go together. We'll be brothers. We'll be a team. Twin boys. the Isaac boys, man, we're gonna really be something. And Jacob says, well, I'd love to. But you know what? Esau, have you ever had kids? Have you ever had kids? You know, they don't travel really well. Yeah, they don't travel well. So you know what we should do? You know what I think I'll do with my family? We need to rest a little bit. But you know, Esau, I'll catch up with you later. And Esau says, okie dokie, and heads off. And what does Jacob do?
Take the other way.
Takes the other way. Now, what Jacob, though, ends up doing is, where's he going? Where does Jacob end up going? Because Esau is going to Edom. Where's Jacob going?
Shechem?
Where Shechem, he is going, but that's in the land. He's going into the Canaanites. He's going into Canaan. So he is going into the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and to him. So he's going into that promised land. If he followed Esau, he wouldn't be. And that's where Jacob belongs. And so we've got reconciliation with Esau.
So why did he want to reconcile with Esau if he wasn't going with him?
Well, I don't know that he necessarily cared about reconciling. I don't know that Jacob cared about reconciling with
You
Esau.
think they just came on?
Yeah, I think that the Esau.
Self-preservation.
What's that?
Self-preservation.
Yeah, I think he was scared. I think the whole this becomes almost a test of faith for Jacob. How well God's going to honor the covenant. Okay. And even though God isn't intervening, except with this strange wrestling story, you know, God is being faithful to Jacob just like he was to Abraham when he was asked to sacrifice Isaac. You know, God working behind the scenes enables Jacob to be the one who carries the promise. And that's what he ends up doing as he enters the land that was promised. Okay? And so we've got this story. Jacob is there. God has been playing this role behind the scenes. We're in 34 and we get another story, Judy, you did not teach your kids in Sunday school. Because it is a nasty little story. But that's not the first one. What's going on in chapter 34? 34. Well, we got one of Jacob's daughters. And remember when we were looking at the kids produced, Dinah was the only one mentioned, the only female mentioned. Well, it's because she's going to play a role in the story. And what's her situation, Dinah?
She gets attacked.
She gets attacked by a guy named Shechem, who is Hamor, is the king. Now, understand this is being read to people living way later. And Shechem is a city they know about. And so what they're doing is what the writer is doing is saying, you know, Shechem, oh, by the way, you know that town Shechem that, you know, we went through when we were traveling? This is the story about Shechem. You know, how that city started. And it started because there was a person named Shechem. And what did that person do? The Hivite, he raped her. He raped Dinah. Which, again, you know, I've said before, the writer has no problem giving elbows to people who are living in this land. You know, they are not great people. The Canaanites and the Hivites are a Canaanite tribe. You know, so it's not good. But what happens to Shechem after the attack? He falls in love with her, right? And he goes to Daddy and says, Daddy, what? I want to marry her. Now, what does Jacob find? What does Jacob find out?
He finds out what he did.
Finds out what Shechem did to his daughter. But the other boys are out with the cattle, right? And what proposal does Hamor make with respect to Shechem and Dinah?
Wants to marry to the girl.
Okay, please, my son is really infatuated with your daughter, and he wants to marry her. And what are we going to do? What am I willing to do to make this work?
Shared ground.
Man, we are gonna share ground. We're gonna share what else are we gonna share?
Family.
We're gonna share family. You know, you got a bunch of boys there. You know, we got some cute looking girls here.
We'll even get circumcised.
Yeah, we're gonna be married, you know, intermarry. And we're gonna be one people. Now, there's a problem though. What's the problem in a broader sense? What's the problem?
They're Hittites.
That they're Hivites, and they're which makes them Canaanites, and we all know Canaanites are what?
Bad.
No good. Canaanites are no good, and so, but it seems like a pretty good deal, right? Well, what ends up being the response?
The brothers get mad at them.
Okay, well the brothers hear, right? The brothers hear this deal being worked out. They're coming in, they hear the deal, the proposal. And the brothers say to Hamor and the representatives, whoever, what do they say?
They can't let her marry someone.
Well, you know, it sounds like a pretty good deal. There's just one problem. We are circumcised. And it would be just plain wrong if the girl marries a guy that's not circumcised. That would be just plain wrong. Okay? And you know, if you want to develop later, you know, we're going to have to intermarriage. This is something you're going to have to think about anyway. So what we propose is you got a deal if
Y'all get circumcised.
everybody gets circumcised. Well, what, shouldn't Shechem be the only one? Well, if we're going to intermarry, you know, we got other girls here. We don't want to intermarry with non-circumcised guys. So what does Hamor and Shechem decide?
We go ahead and get her with it.
We are going to do it. Okay, we're going to make an order. Every male in the tribe is going to be circumcised. Okay? I'm sure the guys in the tribe said,
Just
Oh,
throw
yeah.
yay! 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 And they do. They have to heal up, right? As they're healing up. What do Simeon and Levi, two of her brothers, what do they choose to do?
They
kill
decide
them
to
all.
kill
They
them.
slaughter all the males in this tribe. They kill Hamor, the king. They kill Shechem. They kill everybody, right? They're just killing like crazy. Wipe them all out. And then what do the other brothers do?
Loot the town.
Yeah, they go and take all the stuff. You know, so they kill all the guys and all the males, plunder the town. I'm sure they get a few dates, and they they got all that wealth, right? Now, how does Jacob react to what Simeon and Levi have done?
I said, what have you done?
Yeah.
Now we're in real trouble.
Yeah.
Canaanites and
Yeah.
Perizzites.
Right, because they're Canaanites and they're going to be after us, right? So what you did was strategically bad, and they said, man, we had to do it. Our sister, we got to defend our sister's honor by slaughtering everybody in the other tribe. Now, you know, again, why is this story here? I mean, what purpose is the organizer who is putting stories in? I mean, he's not putting in every story ever written. He's choosing what to put in. Why would he choose to put this in? Why do you think he would choose to put this story in? Because somebody hasn't really been mentioned in this story. Who wasn't mentioned in this story? God wasn't mentioned in this story, right? Why would he put this in?
Is this what happens when men just do what they They think they should.
Okay, then, and what's going to be interesting is there'll be consequences to Levi and Simeon, because they are going to be two tribes that won't get land. Levi will be the priests, and they won't receive land. Simeon is going to end up becoming incorporated with Judah. So Simeon, they're going to pay, the descendants are going to pay consequences, so it's going to be reflected on the map of Israel. Again, we've got this another situation where God is not involved. But what has been the result? What's the result of this? What is the result, the end result, after the dust settles and the blood has dried? Jacob and his sons have
More stuff.
more stuff, more power, right? More stuff and more power. So they end up acquiring it. That's why, in a sense, they're being blessed, but you almost got to put quotation marks around it, because they're being blessed because they did this horrendous act.
They sinned.
But God is still, even though it's not implicit, they are still being blessed and protected. Now, what happens? So we got 34. What happens in 35? At the beginning of 35? God says, go to Bethel. Bethel. And remember, that was the ladder. Now, how does he prepare his people? Because they're going to, now that's further in the land, that's in the northern part. How does Jacob, and again, he's still being called Jacob. How is Jacob preparing his people to go to Bethel? They got to get rid of the gods. Not only get rid of the gods, they have to get rid of
Jewelry.
even their jewelry. And I don't know. He's burying it under a tree. I don't know. But he does. They're purifying themselves, right? And as they're going into the land, what's happening as they journey? What does it say in verse 5 is happening as they make their journey? Okay, God is protecting. And remember, that's kind of an irony there, because Jacob was so concerned about what happened at Shechem. Even though these seem to be coming from these are two separate stories. The writer, I think, as he's putting them together, is connecting them. Jacob is feeling concerned that he's going to be killed by the foreign people, but he isn't, because the foreign people in the land he's moving through are afraid of him. Why?
Because God's with him.
Because of
His blessing.
Because of God. Because God is with him. Is protecting him. Okay, so they get to Bethel. What does he do at Bethel? Of course, because this is what they do. He builds an altar, and we've got God doing what? Appearing to him, right? Is after he builds this, God appears to him, and God says to him what?
You'll no longer be called Jacob.
You're no longer going to be called Jacob, you're going to be called Israel. I am experiencing deja vu all over again, because we've got him renamed a second time, which tells us what? Two different stories. Two different stories involving the naming. And it changes, because the name means the same. Israel still means striving with God, struggling with God. The name is the same, but it becomes a little different meaning. That we're looking at his whole life being a kind of a struggle with God, and something that's going to transfer over to Israel. And what else does God do? Which is not a shocker, because he's done it to Jacob before.
He's going to become a father again.
He's going to become a father, and he's going to have land, and God is doing what? Reinforcing a covenant again. So he is still present. Now we've got Israel, right? As they journey, what happens? What happens to Rachel, his favorite wife? Rachel ends up dying, but she dies. How does she die? She dies in childbirth. And who is born? Benjamin is born. So now we've got the sons complete, because Joseph has a brother, Benjamin, which will become important later. Now, if you look at the whole family of Jacob, who should be the one to carry the promise?
The first one born.
The first one. And who was the firstborn?
Reuben.
Reuben was the firstborn. Remember the inventor of the sandwich. And the Reuben was the firstborn, but the writer tells us why Reuben is not going to be the one to carry the promise. Why is he not going to carry the promise?
See, the
Because he
son-
did something no son should do. He got familiar with one of his dad's concubines. I know in my family, we were never allowed to do that. But then we were in Virginia. So now we've got, so Reuben is not going to carry the promise. And we've got Israel, and Israel has how many sons?
12.
He has 12 sons, and they're all named. And all of a sudden, Jacob comes to who?
Isaac.
Isaac. Wait a minute. Didn't Isaac die like 5 chapters ago? He sure seemed to, but he's not dead now. And in fact, what happens when Isaac dies?
Jacob and Esau buried.
Jacob and Esau buried him. Again, I'm experiencing deja vu all over again. When did we see that before? That we have somebody important die and 2 sons handle the funeral? Abraham. When Abraham died, it said that Isaac and Ishmael were there. And now Isaac dies and we have Jacob and Esau. Okay. So Isaac finally he's expired. Jacob has gone through a lot. And now we're at 36, and I want to cover 36, so let's go through this in detail.
I have to go to that.
Yeah, let's read it. I'll take volunteers. Let's read this chapter. We'll go around. Now, it's a lot of stuff in here. Now, why is this
There goes
stuff?
your Bible study.
Why is this stuff here? Because there's a ton of stuff about names and sons and
Gods.
locations. Well, one, we know something about the writer. Whoever. Now I'm not talking about the person who put it together. I'm talking about the person who first put this to papyrus. What do we know about this guy that writes this stuff?
He's probably related to them.
Well,
He's a counter.
he's a counter. He is a bean counter.
Oh, okay.
And we got some bean counters because we've had these lists before, right? And this seemed to be a characteristic of one of the strains of writing, that they had, bean counters, structures, numbers. Those were a big deal to make sure, and this becomes helpful later because so many of these names of people are associated with cities and territory and countries. So what the writer is doing is he's outlining, what is happening in the land. I think is also providing a little break in the story because the stories where Jacob plays the pivotal role, those stories are
Raunchy?
well, they are raunchy. They are. That's exactly right. They're also oval. But Peg,
What?
the raunchiness will continue, so take heart.
Yeah.
Because the Joseph stories aren't going to be any.
It does to this day.
Yes, it's not going to be a bed of flowers, the story of Joseph. Okay, so what have we got here as we kind of tie up the Jacob stories? What can we say about God as a result of these stories about Jacob?
I think he wanted to keep them separated, like the brothers.
Okay, the brothers being separated. Well, we'll talk about the people in a minute. What is this saying about God? What are these? That God wanted them separate. Okay, I see what you're saying. That God wanted the brothers separate. Okay, good. What else might it say about God? What else can we learn about God as a result of these Jacob stories? But God has a plan, sort of.
Saying
He has his chosen people.
Okay.
The land and the people,
The-
they would be many and spread out. So
The-
she just shows that.
That God is working out that plan, and if he makes a covenant, he keeps his side of it. What else do you think it shows?
He has chosen ones.
Okay, that God has chosen Jacob. Why has God chosen Jacob?
Because that's what the covenant.
The heck if I know why he chose Jacob. I don't know why anybody would choose Jacob for anything. But God chose him. And God's will is done. And this is what Paul sees as so important. That it was never the quality of Jacob that caused God to choose him over his brother. In fact, his brother seems like a pretty nice guy. I'm not sure if Esau had done to Jacob what Jacob did to Esau. Jacob would have been running up and greeting him and kissing him and say, let bygones be bygones, let's be business partners. I don't think that. What was the word you used?
Pig.
Pig, thank you very much. He's kind of a pig. And Esau, it seems like a much nicer guy than Jacob. And yet God chose to love Jacob. And what? What was the word that Malachi used, Paul also used? God chose to love Jacob and hate Esau. Because that's how God's promises work. God is in control. And it's not necessarily the nobleness of Jacob or any of the patriarchs that make them special. It's the God who is moving, pushing this story. Like I said, this is a biography of God, not a biography of Jacob. This is God's story. This is God's story.
Do we ever hear from Esau again?
I don't think we do. I think this is it
That's
for
what I was
Esau.
trying to remember.
Yeah, I think Esau is done because I don't think Esau plays any role in the Joseph story. And I'll tell you somebody else who doesn't play much of a role in the Joseph story that we'll start looking at next week when we do 37 and 38. Only 2 chapters because it's packed. We're not going to hear a lot about God. God is not going to be integral in terms of a character in the story. Like we've seen God before as an active participant in the story. We're not going to see God. But again, we've been prepared for that because God hasn't always been active in the Jacob stories. But we know that he's working behind the scenes. Okay, and then we'll talk about Joseph. One other thing just to file away, as the writer, as this person is compiling these stories, it would sure appear as we move into the Joseph stories that Joseph is the one who is supposed to carry the promise. Is the chosen one. But there's going to be some tension because for the tribes in the south, Joseph is going to be associated with a tribe called Ephraim because that's one of his sons. And Ephraim is going to inherit part of the land. The north is going to focus on Ephraim. The south is going to focus on, what's the big tribe of the south? Big tribe of the south is going to be called Judah. And as the story goes, Judah is going to become more and more important as the chosen tribe. But when we read Genesis, it sure would appear as though it's not Judah, it's going to be Joseph. Joseph is going to be the chosen one. Therefore, his son, Ephraim, the one he blesses, you would think. But then Ephraim is going to there's going to be an interesting relationship between Israel and Judah. Okay, any questions about it? Thank you so much. This was a lot of stuff. That was a lot of stuff. We had to go through it. If you want to read more about Dinah, please feel free to really study that. Okay, let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to study your word. Remind us that this is your story. That the people then are just like people now. They have all kinds of flaws. but you are the one who keeps your promises, and you are the one who's driving the story. So remind us that we can count on you. In your name we pray, amen.